Zimbabwean businessman is supposedly in the middle of a multi-billion shillings JKIA modernization contract. In this World Cup season, Adani carves the ball to Chivayo just outside the box. Haya, Chivayo na mpira, Chivayo anakwenda. We have some denials. Meanwhile, victims of violent repression of demonstrations are slated to receive compensation packages ranging between 1 and 3 million shillings as government takes responsibility for crackdowns that led to deaths and injury between 2017 and 2025. What are the implications of the compensation plan? In our final words, Kaikai's kicker drags the elephant into the room in the political violence compensation arrangement. Bonyo picks a bone with members of parliament who can't interact with facts in the finance bill debate. Sam's sense calls for a sense of tolerance in the country's politics. And on my memo tonight, have Kenyans become numb to death? Why we need a meeting of conscience. Yvonne's stake is up and about the high seas. The news gang is here.
At around 10 a.m., a group of goons numbering between 30 and 50 overran our guards at the gate entrance into the cathedral. The guards tried to repel them, but there were too many, and being not armed, they were overrun. A few police officers who were on patrol within and outside tried to join forces, but they too were overrun. The group made their way very deliberately and in a calculated manner past the sanctuary over to the St. Nicholas Hall in the CTC, where the event that brought together about 300 people was happening. When the team reached the St. Nicholas Chapel, they unleashed terror on the post-budget review seminar participants. Some of them were chanting, "Ua, ua," which is the Swahili version of kill, kill. And others were chanting popular slogans associated with some political formations.
That's Provost Evans Omolo narrating from the pulpit what happened in All Saints Cathedral, where goons were seen on CCTV cameras entering the church premises, disrupting a meeting that was discussing the budget, looting and causing terror and mayhem. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today, it's me against the three of you. Mutajionea ajabu, oi. But karibuni. We start with the goons topic today, and I think we need to talk about what was seen. If you can see the video on screen, Robert, as we talk about what we saw at the compound of All Saints Cathedral and how the thugs or the goons, who are really many, I don't know how many there were, but there were almost 20, 25, 30 of them, who entered the premises of All Saints Cathedral. As we say in Kiswahili, mchana peupe. There was a meeting that was going on. There was footage of them entering that meeting, terrorizing those who were in there, forcing people to flee. Then there was also footage of them on the corridors, attacking people, looting, stealing phones, and then leaving on borders like nothing happened. One of them was arrested, but afterwards, of course, after all the hue and cry, after all the complaints about what was happening, a few others were arrested and taken to court. There was a gang in Mathare, I think chini ya Mnazi, that was said to be behind it. But then we had an interview with a gentleman who said he had been part of the gang. There were questions about him and all that. But he talked about how they're mobilized, how they're paid, how they're used by different politicians, how when they were going for that event, they didn't know there was CCTV. But I think the question that comes to mind is this growing culture of goonism in the country, how we've seen political meetings being disrupted, we've seen property being destroyed, we've seen citizens being assaulted in some instances and even robbed. And yet, despite CCTV footage, despite their witnesses and repeated incidents, accountability is seeming limited. So the question I think we're asking tonight, and maybe I'll start with you, Sam, is who protects these goons? And why do you think there's this happened mchana peupe. And other incidents, and I know we'll talk about them, like the charge in Wetima in Othaya, or there was one in PCM Wiki in Kasarani, and there was a chaos at a rally in Kikuyu. That happened mchana peupe. Even when Senator Osotsi was attacked, he was attacked in broad daylight at a cafe where there was CCTV. So kuna hii kutojali about whether tuonekane, whether we'll be identified, whether we'll be seen. Nothing will happen, Sam.
It's been a very disturbing week to especially realize. I think it was on Friday when it was just a normal news day, and then you start hearing that some organizations that had been meeting at the All Saints Cathedral complaining that they had been attacked, and so you eventually have to make do with the CCTV footage. Of course, there was also conversations we had with the persons that were attending. But to imagine that a group of civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, human rights organizations, professional bodies that had met there, of course, also hosted by the community of the All Saints Cathedral, to have a conversation of Kenyans on what they had witnessed just the previous day. The Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury had spent close to 3 hours talking about the budget statement for the 2026-2027 financial year. So this was an opportunity for members of the public to come together, because the common good here is the country, to have a conversation on what does the budget mean for us, if there are conversations about the finance bill, what does it mean for us. But to see those events and those goons attacking what was a peaceful conversation, and a peaceful conversation at an unlikely venue. This is church premises. Of course, the All Saints Cathedral has facilities, and many churches in the city anyway have conference facilities that they offer people that may want to meet. And I'm sure many of us have had an opportunity to even attend gatherings there for different causes, whether it's social or otherwise. So it was very disturbing to see that. And when you listen to the voices of the people that were there and the fear that was instilled at that event, you just start to wonder what exactly were those organizing those going to be there planning to achieve. Because thereafter, you hear the confessions and the narration, like Provost was talking to us and telling us that that matter, as of Monday, had sort of died. It was on Friday when it happened. There was at least one arrest, but as of Monday, the person who had been arrested had actually been released. We also understood that the persons that had reported their phones to have been stolen were actually compensated. And when you ask around, you hear that politicians are involved. At least the money that was paid off, for, I think it's 24,000 shillings per mobile phone. That money is said to have been channeled from a political leader. And you're wondering, when you hear CS Kipchumba Murkomen talking about that we know these people, we have arrested at least one person, we're going to arrest more. Yesterday, I think the Inspector General of Police was saying that more arrests have been made, and there had also been a call for people to come forward and volunteer information to assist with the investigations. Then you start to wonder, if some of these people are known, why is it taking so long to take action against them? Because when a cabinet secretary says it is politicians who are planning it, and they said that it's politicians from either side, why aren't we dealing with it? We have spoken to different people, including politicians themselves, and they are saying that it is, so the gang is like an organization, not news gang, but the goons, let me call them so. They are like an organization. They are free for hire. So Jamila, have a political event in your ward, you hire them. JB, you have another one in support of your team, you hire them. So why aren't we getting to the bottom of this? The Inspector General also promised yesterday that this has to end. But we're not seeing it ending. We are talking too much with zero action.
Yeah, when you talk about talking too much with zero action, and I remember what one of those goons said, and he talked about how there was collusion. He claimed there was collusion with the police. I think let's listen to what he says, and then we can continue.
Tukaingia na mapikipiki ama polisi tulikuwa nao akatuambia hii inachoma, tutoe mapikipiki twende tupaki nje. Kuna mali tuliodeshwa hapo kando wale watengeneza barabara, tukaeka mapikipiki. Tuliambiwa kutakuwa CCTV. Saa moja wetu akaona CCTV, sasa ikalitashia zama polisi pia wenye walisikia kuna CCTV wakageuka watu. Sasa akaanza kukimbizana na watu, akaanza kukuaje. Sasa hapo ndio sisi tulitoka mbio mpaka hata tukulipiwa huko. Tulikuwa tunakuja kuletewa pesa kama tumeshafika huko kwetu.
And he had spoken about how they had been promised 2,000 shillings. Then afterwards, the payment went down to 1,000 shillings because the money was supposed to be used to help release those who had been arrested during that event. And
such a raw deal, yeah?
Totally. But you know, and when you speaking about, you talked about Provost when he was on your show on Daybreak, I think on Monday morning, and he talked about how there was unwillingness to follow this through. Let's listen to the Provost on this.
The said people who financed this stepped in to kill this case because of the publicity it has attracted, said, please release this guy. The guy was released. 2 people whose phones was allegedly stolen and went to complain. They were reimbursed 24,000 shillings each so that this case does not proceed.
I know there are people who are wondering, if I attend a church meeting, if I attend a political rally, if I attend a public gathering, I should be confident enough that I'll leave there safe, that it will not be attacked. Because Archbishop Olisapit talked about what that meeting was about. He said it was a reflective meeting and he did not understand why we had goons coming to attack the participants. Let's listen to him.
Reflective meeting. It was not a clandestine meeting. It was not a meeting to overthrow anyone. It was a meeting to understand the implication of the budget. So why should somebody pay money and give young people a bad name? Now they have acquired a bad name in Kenya of being called goons, known for disrupting peaceful gatherings in the churches, in homes, and in public spaces, even in people's home and in the streets. So we want to condemn that culture of whoever feels threatened by people conversing and Kenyans talking. It's not acceptable in our nation, which is a democracy.
It's going to be happening as frequently as it does, mchana peupe, and there's no fear of reprisals or any action being taken against the perpetrators.
Jamila, on that particular Friday, there were more than 10 post-budget conversations going on within Nairobi. It's a tradition. Every year in June, after the minister in charge of National Treasury has put in his budget statement, a number of organizations and institutions discusses his statement. So there was nothing unique with what was happening at the All Saints Cathedral. And therefore, the question that begs is, why were some people feeling so agitated by this conversation that was happening? We covered a number of audit firms that were doing similar conversations on that particular day. Why did they not send these people to attack these same institutions that were carrying out these conversations? So this makes it unique that somebody somewhere felt that a conversation happening in a church could generate so much heat for them that they wanted to disrupt it. And the Archbishop raises very fundamental issues, that the state in which these people approached the church, if you know the general geography of the All Saints Cathedral, when a meeting is happening at CTC, if you're not a member, you can hardly get it. You need directions. But these goons walked in straight into where this was happening, meaning the person who was coordinating them knew where this meeting was, had probably done a recce and knew where these guys were sitting and how to go about it. And the other thing that is perturbing, that up to date, we've only seen 5 people arraigned in court, is the confession by the ones that we spoke to. And he boldly says that polisi wale tulikuwa nayo wakatuombea hizi mapikipiki tu zitachoma tuziondoe. Wakasema hapo kuna CCTV tutoke. You ask a very simple question, that in deployment of police officers every morning from the particular stations there's a chain of command. So who is this that deployed these police officers? And that is why when I hear the Inspector General of Police speak tough, I really wait for the day his words will match his actions, because this is something that he needs to take right from his backyard, because these boys says well and loudly that they had police officers who were directing them. And from the CCTV camera, we can see the police officers. So who deployed them to the All Saints Cathedral? To either man All Saints Cathedral or accompany these boys to this. So what is happening basically is that you see a lot of state complicity in this, because the police are a representation of the state. So you see the hand of state in this. The politicians, well, they can finance, they can do, but the moment police officers, taxpayers funded, join in on such, then clearly you see that this is something that has been given the green light by the state. So the question we should ask IG Kanja is, who deployed these police officers who are with these gangs? We've seen previously, Jamila, cases where the DCI has come out very boldly and told us how they've used the forensic lab and analyzed CCTVs and arrested these people. Out of a potential 30 people that committed this crime, to date, you've only arrested 5 people. The CS Interior promised action. A week later, only 5 people. Clearly, there's a breakdown somewhere, or somebody is cleverly trying to manage us so that this goes away and they move on. So sad that even this morning, to see how this goon culture is now becoming a permanent fixture, a school in Chemelil, in Kisumu County, 20 goons went to the principal's office, stole money, beat up staff, non-teaching staff, took their mobile phones and walked away. And up to this evening, no arrest has been made. So it's clearly telling us that, hey, this is something that we have bred, and because there are no actions, people are taking it as the only way out to deal with the issues. So the state is complicit in this.
You know, when you talk about the state is complicit in this, the goon who spoke to us mentioned even the involvement of elected officials. Let's listen to the gentleman telling us about a member of parliament.
Sisi kitu tuliambiwa kuna MP2 fulani alikuwa ametuma do watu waende shughuli, lakini by the time tuko naenda hatukujua ni MP fulani, lakini tunajua tu ni MP wa Nairobi. Alikuwa ametunganishia kazi, lakini bado sasa hatujui ni MP mgani. Ukipata mtu na kitu unaweza chukua tu, ukiona ameweka mbaya chukua. Hiyo time ndio umepata nafasi. So to some extent pia wana encourage hiyo, lakini si watu wote wanaenda juu hiyo. Kuna tu mtu anaenda pia wale apate hiyo 1000 ama 1500 ama 2000.
And JB, you talked about the security apparatus, the leadership of the police, and how they need to tell us what's going on. Even the Minister for Interior has spoken about this. And I remember, I think sometime in April, when we had incidents of goonism, he had said the intelligence or their investigations had shown that there are about 100 gangs. And he talked about how politicians are in. Even now, he talks about how politicians are involved. But then what next? Because it's just all talk. He keeps saying, oh, we know who they are, oh, we will find them. But we're not seeing action. I want us to listen to the CS for Interior and the Inspector General of Police.
That was really extremely unfortunate and unacceptable. We know that they were captured in a CCTV camera. The DCI is already analyzing that CCTV camera. One of them was arrested immediately and a number are being arrested. We will take those people to court and they will be held to account.
If there is anyone who is going to be mentioned in the course of that investigation, then we will go to them. During investigations, if you are mentioned, whether you are an officer in the uniform or not, we will deal with you as the law guides.
And you know, one of the things that concerns me is that we are discussing this a year and maybe 2 months before we enter a highly charged election period. And usually, as we have seen, political temperatures rise as elections approach. And we keep saying, if organized groups are disrupting meetings with such confidence today, so what happens when campaigns begin in earnest? Are we going to start seeing more of such cases if action is not taken now? What happens when the stakes are even higher? What happens? It doesn't matter whether they're government goons or opposition goons. The issue is whether our leadership and the security of this country is willing and able to guarantee the safety of its citizens now, regardless of their political affiliation, Linus.
Jamila, I think the best place to start is to have the Cabinet Secretary in charge of the Interior and the Inspector General in charge of the police to take a polygraph test on this question of goons. Let them be subjected to one. Let them take a polygraph test on whether they're being truthful with the country. Because we have to look at the trail, and there is a trail to these activities of goonism. The trail dates as far back as the period between 18th and 25th of June 2024, when the Gen Z protests were taking place in Nairobi and around the country. One of the notable reactions in those days, and one of the notable responses, was we started really regular protesters, because the regular protesters that were identified as early as the 18th of June 2024 were armed with only three things: bottles of water, a flag, and a mobile phone. Three harmless tools. In fact, I remember in one of the shows that time, we acknowledged that for the first time, we've had protests that were free of stones, fires, and violence. Because that is how the Gen Zs came to town. They came in peace, and they were talking of a very peaceful protest. That changed because somebody somewhere knew introducing an element of violence will actually justify the use of force in one way, or two, will actually disperse the peaceful protesters. And that is the truth we need to interact with as a country. The culture of peaceful protests was interrupted by goons in 2024. And we all remember, again, I need to point to recent events. The first one being the Mbeere North by-election. We saw people that were working with policemen that were not regular voters. They had djembe sticks, and they tend to be the new uniform of the goons culture. We saw those djembe sticks, and what does that remind you? It reminds you of the attack on the church in Othaya, where again there were mobs, there were people who were not in uniform that were walking side by side with the police in Othaya, where a church was attacked, a church service that was attended by former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua.
I think we have some of those pictures, Linus. We can show them.
Okay,
Yes.
we can run that.
Yes, as you talk. Yes, continue.
Yeah. And what does that also take you back to? Do we remember one of the protests in the city, in the city, CBD, Central Business District of Nairobi, and we saw young men again with those djembe sticks, and they famously stopped at City Hall to say, "Tunalinda jiji," we are protecting the city. Now, tie all that to the clear reluctance to act on the All Saints goons, and the confessions of the one suspected goon that spoke to us. There is a trend to this. There can only be this kind of reluctance if there is official sanction of some of this activity. So I think we have a suspect in government when it comes to this deployment of goons. That is why, Jamila, I'm suggesting a polygraph will be very healthy to the CS of Interior and the man in charge of the police. And I want us to listen to him again. I think we heard him talking about the culture of goonism, where he's talking about no exception against all goons. And look, listen, and tell me if you are persuaded this is conviction talk.
1, 2, 3. Okay.
Throughout the Republic of Kenya, whether it is in Kiambu, whether it is in Kiambu, whether it is in Central Kenya, whether it is in Nyanza, wherever it is, goons will be dealt as such, and they will be dealt as individuals who have committed crimes against the Constitution of Kenya.
I feel it for police officers who are professional when they're encountered with moments like this. Because when goons enjoy certain protection, it becomes actually a career-threatening move if you do the right thing. In actually the footage of All Saints Cathedral, there are some policemen who are seen fighting or beating or pushing back these mobs that were running in. And you know, that tells you there are policemen out there who would want to do the right thing. But Jamila, the culture of use of mobs in things like this, and we've trailed it, not just from 2024. I need to mention that it has happened ever before in the history of this country. We've had mungiki used by KANU, especially in the years of the multi-party struggle, when they started off as young men that were allowed to man matatu stations, and they enjoyed some powers, and some of them were in those red KANU t-shirts. They're used for a political purpose. But here is the problem with such deployments. It is very temporal. There is a saying in Kiswahili, mchimba kaburi, huingia mwenyewe, and you have to go in and come out. And when you see some of them ending up in court, it's a very, very lonely time on the dock. Because at the end of everything, the right thing must be done for the sake of the country and the state. Because you still have to retain some semblance of reliance on institutions. So this is a really dangerous trend. And we are making these assumptions because of the inaction that we have seen. If indeed these goons were acting out of their own free will, we would have seen a very robust response from the government. Do we forget that government actually trailed people for social media posts during the anti-government protests by the Gen Z? So you want to tell me you can then physically appear at City Hall and appear physically at All Saints Cathedral, but somehow you cannot be trailed? But somebody faceless before, who posted something out of an apartment in Ngong, can be found. You can see an equal application of commitment in fighting this. So this government, on this goons issue, needs to take a polygraph test.
And I think someone needs to take responsibility. According to Archbishop Ole Sapitwe, he says there are people who should resign. Let's listen to him.
If they don't, and not only them, together with their sponsors, if they don't, then the DCI and the Inspector General of Police have no business in sitting in those offices. They should resign as an honorable thing.
And the civil society is also raising the alarm, saying that this is happening now. What will happen by the time the elections in 2027 approach? Let's listen to them.
As the country moves closer to the 2027 general election, these developments require urgent national attention. Political competition should be guided by ideas, policies, and respectful debate, not coaction, violence, or fear.
Public commitment by the National Police Service to dismantle organized goon networks operating across the country.
These goons have been used by the state. We have not seen even one arrest so far. And it tells you clearly that there is a hand behind all this, what is going on.
The signs that we are seeing, including these goon attacks in different places, obviously point towards a violent election.
You know, some history teaches us that political goons rarely remain just goons, because when these groups are repeatedly mobilized, they are financed, they're protected, they're tolerated for political purposes. they're often involved into something that is a bit more difficult to control. Today they're disrupting meetings. Maybe today they're terrorizing people in meetings. Tomorrow maybe you'll see them enforcing political influence. You know, the day after you may see them forming their own criminal networks for their own interests, their own sources of income, and then they have their own structures of power. So they're evolving. And this has been seen to happen in many countries across the world. So these groups that are originally used as political enforcers now end up becoming a threat, not only to their opponents, but to the very people themselves who created these groups. As Linus was saying, Mchimba kaburi uingia mwenyewe. That's why I think this issue should not be viewed as a short-term political tactic. You need to look at the long-term effects of this. So what next? They're being used now. But then it's not like watazimika kabisa watapotea. They may actually end up bringing problems later, and someone has to do something.
Because it becomes some form of livelihood. You had the suspect who spoke to us saying that tukaitwa kuko na shughuli. Assignment. And if this continues, because you tackle an assignment today, you need another one tomorrow. Yep. Because you need to leave, you need to support your family or even yourself. And I think one of the greatest injustice that we're having is circumventing the path of justice, or the system of justice. Because when you hear people that are involved telling you that the offender has compensated the complainants and the complaint has been withdrawn, especially for those that had lost their property, in this case the mobile phones, why are we allowing this to do? I mean, why are we allowing this to happen? You can imagine that a police station has the arm that conducts the investigations. A matter has been reported. The police are now investigating it. Then someone comes and says, tumaliza hii kesi, get me those two complainants, this is their compensation, case closed. Why would we allow that? If someone has come to make the compensation, they should be arrested, because we're getting to the point where instead of all this talk, we need to arrest someone, name them, shame them, so that people will know that despite being a member of parliament or a member of a county assembly, they also involve themselves in some particular form of violence to intimidate people, because this cannot be allowed. Because as we move on, you'll expect that whatever the Inspector General is saying, you'd expect it to be followed to the letter. But when there's not that promise, then what do we become? You've heard of people saying, and especially political leaders, that because they've been attacked before, now they prepare themselves properly ahead of a meeting. What a country is that? Even when you hear that for you to hold a public rally, a public meeting, you have to inform the police, but then you inform the police, but you're also beaten. So what is that supposed to be? What shall we do? Because you can imagine that I think in the last election you had close to 20,000 candidates in the entire election. You expect that the number will be higher come next year. All these are candidates that you want to mobilize for votes. How are they supposed to do it if you have every small village, there's a gang of criminals that are supposed to be hired to protect people? How are we going to sustain that kind of a process? And we don't live for elections anyway. But you can imagine the disruption that this brings to even daily lives, that a person is going to take part in some public participation process about a budget, and you're beaten there just for expressing your mind or just sitting there to listen, to learn.
And the fear that you
erosion,
yes.
The erosion, and just what the point being raised here by some, the erosion of the authority of institutions. I think it needs to worry every Kenyan that this is being adopted almost as a normal way of doing things. And it is, what, for example, are we doing about the authority of the police? We are undermining it. We are breaking it. And you know what happens after. And this is the story of Haiti. Haiti started this way. And we have the ironical, the irony of actually being involved in fighting gangs there. They're still dealing with a problem that was started in the years of a president called Papa Duvalier, and then his son, Baby Doc.
Yes.
And they relied on gangs. You know, one of the deadliest gang leaders, called Barbecue. His nickname is Barbecue. Was actually a former police officer. And we have enough retired police officers in this country. You're just throwing these nasty ideas the wrong way, and the day it slips through our fingers, we will have all these mobs again causing a lot of trouble. In early 2000s, we came closest to having actually a real armed rebellion in the suboutland defense forces. They had to be fought by the military in Mount Elgon. The Kenya Army had to actually be deployed by President Kibaki. Same 2000s, we had the Minister for Internal Security, John Mishuki, having to order a massive police operation in Mathare and other areas against the Mungiki. So if you let it grow, at some point, you'll have to do the cleanup, and it can be really, really messy.
When you talk about Haiti, Linus, I remember how there were parts of that country, especially the capital city, where you cannot go as a person because you'll be attacked. People are being shot in the streets. People are being kidnapped. And there's lawlessness, and there's a terror and the fear that people live with every day. I don't think we should underestimate what we are seeing right now as a country, because this is just not about one disrupted meeting or one church gathering, because there's this fear you're going to put in people that I'm not guaranteed that if I go for a church service or if I go for a meeting that I will live there safe, that I'll not be attacked. I think it's very important to look at the political culture that we are creating as a country right now as we move closer to another election. I think it's time for a short break. Linus and I think Sam mentioned something about compensation. I think that's what we're going to talk about next. Compensation for victims of human rights violations is our topic after a short break. You're watching NewsGang. Please stay with us.
Mtu yangu, umesikia? Cheza imehama. Na saa hii kodi ya kushinda ni *779#. Smartphone, airtime, bundle, si lazima. Bado unaweza kucheza na kushinda. Dial *779# sasa, select option 1 na game ianze. Ukicheza sport, AI ya cheza inakufanyia analysis. Wewe unafocus tu na kushinda. Na marubani pia wanafly kwa kandege game, wakishinda in seconds bila bundles. Wini yako iko one dial away. Changamka, dial *779# sasa. Cheza, kuwa mjanja. Cheza smart. Gambling is addictive. Not for persons under the age of 18.
Coming soon on Citizen TV. Forbidden Love.
I love you with all my heart.
Dark Secrets.
He's here for revenge, Leonor.
I want that man dead.
Two hearts linked by chance. No! But a tragic accident changes everything.
What did you do to my mom? Come now, Emma.
Now the past threatens to tear them apart.
Stay away. You must stay away from that man.
I'll never rest until I make Leonor San Jose pay for the pain she has caused us.
Will their love survive a legacy of forbidden passion? Daniel.
End of the day, there would be some compensation. So atasema kuna hasara. Wacha tu tuendelee vile tunaenda, because at the end of the day, there's some money. And probably punitive actions, because for me, if you set up such a compensation and it's taxpayers funded, to stem this, please start surcharging the violators. If they're state officers, then get some money from them to go towards that funds, because as taxpayers, we cannot fund these every other time.
Yeah.
There has to be a mechanism in which such a pool is funded, and this must go back to the violators. So for me, it's a good gesture, yes. However, justice must be done. The violators must be brought to book.
And the money will help. It can help pay bills. It can help support children and families who've been left behind, because some of those killed were actual breadwinners in their family. It can ease some of the economic hardship that some of these families have been living with. But then one thing that money cannot do is it cannot answer questions that these people have. Like, it did not explain why a loved one was killed. It cannot explain who gave the orders to have these people killed. It cannot explain why investigations are taking so long. It cannot explain why no one has been brought to book, no one has been jailed, or no punishment has been meted. And I think that's why I understand why some of the victims say that we want more than a compensation. We want an apology. We want transparency on who's being compensated. You know, we want investigations to continue. We want those who are responsible to be held accountable, as you're saying, JB. I think let's listen to the families that were marching today, that went to the office of the IG today, asking that they be allowed to mourn their loved ones on the anniversary of the June 25th protests.
Mimi ningeomba hiyo tarehe ikuwe holiday miaka na miaka. June 25th naomba ikuwe holiday ya mashujaa ya watoto wetu, na tunaomba hiyo siku tafadhali, askari, serikali tafadhali, wasiue watoto wetu tena, wasitumie tear gas.
Na wametuhakikishia watatupea security, na wamesema watabeba bunduki ziko na marisasi. So tunaambia Wakenya watokee, all counties.
Make a clear commitment that never again will the police kill innocent Kenyans. Put in place concrete measures to prevent future violence by state agents.
The president must come out clearly and say, under the Kenyan Constitution, the right, or rather the order to shoot to kill, has no basis in our constitutional order.
They want an acknowledgement that the worst possible crimes have been committed by his officers, and we will not rest until we get rid of that culture of impunity and police brutality.
As leaders, we are out here with them, pledging to be with them, and urging the police to respect the Constitution and the rule of law.
Gentlemen, what these families are talking about is remembrance. Like, as we approach the another anniversary of June 25th, many simply want the opportunity to gather peacefully. They want the opportunity to remember their loved ones. They want to be able to mourn without fear. And it should not be controversial. In fact, according to the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights, I was listening to them, they were talking about how memorialization, like this remembrance, is one of the internationally recognized forms of reparations. That even beyond compensation, you allow them to do this, you allow them to remember, you allow them to mourn, yeah, and include things like acknowledgement, includes things like apology, includes things like truth-telling, yeah, that this is what happened, yeah, and guarantee that these violations will not happen again, because that's the other point, that the ultimate success of this whole thing is, will the country learn from these tragedies, yes or no? And so that you ensure that future generations don't have to face this, where you have protests being violently disrupted and goons entering and people being killed and families getting separated and people getting killed, because no one wants to endure the same pain again and again in the future. Before I go to you, Linus, I want us to listen to the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights Chair, Clarice Oganga, talking about this whole issue of compensation and reparations and its importance. 2.5.
The Commission wants to categorically state that compensation is just one of those components of reparations. And this is in acknowledgement that as a country, we sometimes have resource constraint, and the report highly recommends that priority be given to collective reparations, especially for regions and areas that have historically suffered from the effects of protests.
You know, this kind of reminds me of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission that was headed by Ambassador Bethel Kiplagat, and they went around the country. I remember I went with them when they were in Northeastern, and they went to Agala massacre, what happened, and they listened to families talk about it, and there was a whole report, but then nothing.
Which tells you that as a country, Jamila, we pay a hefty price for what I want to call a national short memory, because we are back to where we have been before. There is nothing that is new here. In fact, the Kiplagat Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, TJRC, was a very elaborate process, very, very elaborate. And it investigated violations of human rights, political violence, land injustices that range from the date of 12th December 1963, which is the date of our independence, and 28th of February 2008, which was the date that the National Accord was signed between President Mwai Kibaki and the former opposition leader who then became the Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, in 2008, in the wake of post-election violence of 2007. What triggered that process was, again, political violence. More than 1,000 people, if the figure is right, I think it was 1133, that were killed in the post-election violence. A majority of them by police bullets died in between 2007 and 2008 as a result of the disputed 2007 general presidential election. Now, this TJRC came up with a lot of very elaborate recommendations that included compensation for victims of political violence. It also included investigation of political assassinations. And I remember the ones that were listed included that of Tom Mboya, who was killed on the 5th of July, 1969. J.M. Kariuki, who was killed on in March 1975, 2nd of March 1975. The likes of Robert Ouko was killed between 12th and 16th of February 1990. So all these people were supposed, the killings were supposed to be investigated and unraveled. What happened instead? That was 2008. In 2013, that is when the TJRC submitted its report. We had a new government and a new round of the same events. I remember in 2013, there was post-election violence. Again, the state was implicated, especially in areas considered to be strongholds of the opposition, where the police deployed in places like Kibra, and people are being beaten and people are being maimed. Same to areas like Nyanza. That was happening in 2013. 2017, again, unspeakable numbers of deaths and a return of political assassinations, because how else can we categorize the death of Chris Msando, who was the head of IT, information technology, at the electoral IEBC at the time. His body was found somewhere after being killed in an apparent assassination a few days to the election. So is it that we are not committed to the processes that we roll out, such as the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, or do we forget so soon? Because I look at how we are treating and behaving around this new compensation, and there was a more elaborate process that looked into very many things, including the 1984 Wagala massacre that happened in Wajir. And recommendations of this TJRC were never fully implemented. Now, we have some sort of commitment to compensate victims of violence between 2017 and 2025. So historically, are we going to keep repeating this and then piecemeal conduct investigations and then compensate? So maybe the next team will look at victims between 2025 and 2027 maybe? Who knows? I think there is a problem with our commitment to making those decisions and saying we are moving forward, Jamila. TJRC did a thorough job. TJRC had very solid recommendations. We not only failed to implement, we proceeded to commit a fresh round of violations.
Let's listen to Professor Makamutua talking about immediate payments. I remember he was part of the team at TJRC back then that went around the country and came up with that elaborate report. Let's hear him about the immediate payments.
And will be in a position, Your Excellency, to begin making payments in as short a time as a week from today.
And then President Ruto said there must be some difficult decisions that need to be made, and he said he's willing to make them. Let's listen to him.
One good friend of mine told me, you know, if you go this journey, you could easily be taken to The Hague because you are actually admitting that your government and those others have committed crimes. But so be it. We must confront this occasion. I've had to make very difficult decisions, so this is no excuse. Let's make this one as well.
So is the president saying that action will be taken?
Well, we've seen the statement today, and the FAQs, frequently asked questions that the panel that is led by Professor Makamuto has shared. And you'll actually realize that there is starting to emerge a difference of figures between what the KNCHR had recommended versus what the Makamuto team is recommending. For the KNCHR, for death or fatalities, they had recommended about 2.5 million shillings at the minimum. The committee is talking about or is it the panel? The panel of Makamuto is talking about a minimum of 3 million shillings. Severe injuries remains at a minimum of 1 million, but there's something that is missing, which is enforced disappearances. The KNCHR had put it at 1.5 million shillings. What Makamuto's team has put together does not have that enforced disappearances. Then you find that there was loss of business that the KNCHR had highlighted to be compensated at the cost of 100,000 shillings at the minimum, but you find that this time round the Makamuto team is recommending a contribution of up to 50,000 shillings. And there are questions there to be raised, because you realize that with that difference, then what is the criterion that is being used to determine that business A should get 50,000 shillings, business B should get 40,000 shillings? What if those businesses were worth more than that? And you recall that even in the last, during the Gen Z protests, there are people that really suffered, even political leaders that suffered some severe loss, some of them running into hundreds of millions of shillings because of what businesses that they were running. And within a very short time, their businesses were back up. So you wonder, is it that insurance paid them off, or was it a political kitty that went into financing that compensation? And then whatever the case may be, a business that may have lost goods worth or business worth more than 50,000 shillings, but they can only be compensated up to 50,000 shillings. What are we doing? Because even in insurance terms, there's a principle of indemnity that we are taking you back to where you were had the loss not been suffered. So I think there are some questions there to be raised, including the report of the KNCHR where they are talking about stakeholder engagement. They are saying that they consulted with they undertook structured and inclusive consultations to fulfill the constitutional requirement of public participation, that they spoke to stakeholders like victims and their representatives. They spoke to survivors, survivors network organizations, civil society organizations, reparations and transitional justice experts. But the question that one must ask is, how much of victims have been involved, or rather have been consulted in arriving at this particular report, and eventually even the figures that have been recommended here? So yes, it's a good move, especially for persons that suffer this loss, whether it's a loss of life or loss of property or injuries or medical expenses they had to incur. But at the same time, it has to be as sufficient as possible to at least put these people closer to the loss that they have suffered. But then again, Jamila, you'll think about what we've seen the past few days. We've seen people killed in police action, not last year, this month of June, in the protest against the Ebola facility in honor of the US government. You've seen people dying in Nanyuki. We've seen at least 2 students shot in the Multimedia University when they were protesting against a delay of their examinations, or the challenges that they were facing there. You do not see the police officers that are involved being taken into account. Yes, you hear the Independent Policing Oversight Authority will come in and say that you're conducting investigations to get to the bottom of this particular matter, but you don't see a lot of action. In the current moment, you have the matters of Gen Zs in 2024 and of course the 2025 last year during the anniversary. In both years, during that period, June, July, we'll have lost 60 people per year. In the Gen Z protest in 2024, more than 60. KNCHR has a record. You remember the former chairperson, may she rest in peace, she was at loggerheads with the government then. Yep. The president, the interior cabinet secretary then and now, they opposed, they rejected the numbers that the KNCHR was advancing. They discounted the numbers, saying that there were not 60. I think the last official figure that the government ever spoke about was just about 40 or 42. When the numbers were at 40, they were saying there were 25. They have always been in denial. So even as we acknowledge that there has been damage suffered, there has been loss of life that has been brought about by action of the state or in these protests, how about the accountability on the side of government to come out and say that you acknowledge this loss and these are the names based on our records? Because KNCHR has those names, and they shared with media houses that sought to understand what those names are. They used to share the status of investigations. I remember one time there was a statement that came from the ODPP, and they were saying that there are several files that have been advanced or presented to them. They were at different stages. Some were lacking in terms of evidence, and they had referred some for further investigations. But then the DPP, I think it was early last year, they said that there will require a whole of society approach to resolving these particular cases of June 2024. Is this what it looks like? Because if it is, then there must be a proper acknowledgement and an apology to each of these families. Rex Masai's family is still looking for justice. You see them there going to Vigilance House to present, or rather to Jogoo House at the headquarters of the offices of the Inspector General. They are there to petition the police to allow them to come out and protest and remember their son. As it stands, they're still seeking justice. It's at the inquiry stage. Imagine how many other families that have not yet found justice or even a path towards justice. So those are things that must also be addressed even as we seek this compensation. At the same time, if you're to go back to the question of figures, if a person dies in the line of duty, you've heard of organizations that will compensate them for up to a salary of 8 years. So you tabulate the salary of the person who has died for 96 months. I don't know how the quantum that Makau Mutua team and the KNCHR team are arriving at, but this is a conversation that at least should be explained to the victims' families and the people that care to listen. So as we proceed, we need to see all these things getting to be communicated so that whoever takes agrees, because they are also saying that taking this compensation is voluntary. But there are also consequences. If you should take this compensation, what is the implication on future seeking justice or seeking compensation in future from the same state? So then also, the other thing that we must do is to assist these families to find closure and justice. You must have seen a lot of families that are still broken as we speak because of the loss that they suffered, whether it's loss of life or property or permanent disability. How do you work with them so that it does not just become a political tool? Some are saying that they want personalized apology. One hopes that this will not become a political opportunity so that you find some people being put together for a meeting to an extent that it becomes a political consultation towards 2027. Okay. One can only hope that that does not happen, that this is not what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about genuine acknowledgement that death has happened or loss has happened, and then proper compensation from the state, the government of Kenya, which has caused all this suffering.
You know, it makes me wonder what value of human life is in the Kenyan societies in terms of mtu amefariki, and you just move on swiftly. If I'm not mistaken, the 2 billion shillings in the supplementary budget that's supposed to pay for this compensation is supposed to be done before the end of the financial year, which is the end of June. So the payment should be made within the next 2 weeks, JB?
Yeah, the money is apparently sitting with the State Department of Interior.
Yes.
And when President talks about making difficult decisions, this is one of the difficult decisions that he has to make.
Yeah.
And have this money sit with the Kenya National Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
Because having it sit with the Ministry of Interior and then you disburse it through this panel probably may not be a good reason.
Yeah.
If the KNHCR was given this mandate to come up with the frameworks and everything, it is important that they handle the entire process. Because when you see Makau Mutua's FAQs today, one of the things he's saying is that people can still submit the applications to them. I think having such multiple channels of submitting these issues will lead us into the issues we saw with IDP compensation, where we will have fictitious people coming in and all that. So having one agency deal with this, and this is KNHCR, would be very, very important so that Kenyans know who is it that is responsible. If we want accountability, we know who to go to, because when you have Makau Mutua-led panel also advancing and giving their own rates different from what the commission has given, then clearly tells you that there's a mismatch somewhere. And that automatically start breeding that mistrust, that the panel told us it's up to 3 million, the commission told us up to 2.5 million. So who is telling us the truth? Who do we go to? So I think they need to straighten up a few things and leave the entire process of compensating these victims to the commission as opposed to this panel, because just like Sam says, there are a few things that this panel has raised that creates doubt into the report that the commission initially released.
And this whole thing about communication, government communication, and the challenges that they've been facing from the beginning also inajitokeza hapa. Talking about communication, tuendelekee katika uwanja wa ndege wa kimataifa wa Jomo Kenyatta, where there's an expansion project in the works, where questions have been raised about who exactly is being given the contract for this expansion, where a certain Zimbabwean businessman, Wicknell Chivayo, has been mentioned adversely, where headlines have talked about how he's in it, how now government is being forced to respond and talk about how this gentleman is not involved in any way, shape or form. Let's listen to CS Churchill on the same.
I think he only features in the media. He's not anywhere in our documents as a bidder. He's not anywhere in our documents as a partner to any of the bidders. So we've just seen the way most of you have seen it in the media. We don't know him, and he's not participating in the bid as a solo or as a partner to any of the bidders.
You know, I think, gentlemen, very few people are arguing that JKIA does not need an expansion. It does need an expansion. You know, I keep remembering when it was raining and the leaking and all that was happening and the complaints from travelers, and how ukifika kwa airport unaanza kujiuliza what is, especially kama umetoka mahali ambapo kuna airport mzuri zaidi, because our airport is our gateway to the world. It is our it's central to tourism, to trade, to transportation, cargo movement, investment. I mean, we cannot understate the importance of JKIA. But then now I think the real story here is the confidence in the process. When reports come out that there is a project like this, Kenyans quickly rejected the government's explanation, especially in terms of the controversies or the secrecy or the lack of information surrounding what the contract is, who has been given, and even the amounts of money. Today, the CS said the project will cost 154.2 billion shillings and should be completed in 36 months. I think citizens of this country have reached a point where they no longer evaluate or look at government projects solely on their merits. When I evaluate, wanasema ikitu ni ukweli, there's credibility questions in it. And this is a challenge. I think government having to be forced to speak out all the time. I think the question that comes up is that whole thing about communication. Why don't you just speak about it from the beginning instead of having to hear bits and pieces here that make people suspicious, JB? I don't know if you have another soundbite of CS Churchill before we continue as JB. Okay, I think we can continue. Bonyo, the issue is transparency, right?
Indeed, and when a government is facing a lot of challenges, especially trust the public, then this is bound to happen. Let me say that I want to give credit to the Kenya Airports Authority or the Ministry of Transport, because I have followed this project since November last year. After they had dismissed the Adani-led one, they started a fresh project, and they have engaged a couple of stakeholders that we can give it to them. I remember even as media, there was a meeting that was held at Fairview Hotel sometime in March, and a progress update was given. However, what the basic question CS Churchill should have answered today is to give Kenyans the contract that has been awarded, if at all it has been awarded, and the content of that contract. Because we are not disputing all these meetings. We are not disputing all these stakeholder engagements. What Kenyans are asking is, who is the ultimate person that has been given this contract? Who is he working with? Because the CS went into generalities, saying that the bids we have received, there are no such a kind of a name and all that. But if you give us that document to scrutinize by ourselves, then we'll be able to tell. However, just mentioning and saying we do not know this person, we have not seen his bid and all that, then further raises the credibility of that award. Because people don't just speak. People speak from a point of having to know the nits and bits of everything. And the people who say that this fraudulent gentleman from Zimbabwe are possibly people within that system who are aggrieved by him getting part of the pie. So this information, just like the Adani one, comes from the internal systems.
Yeah.
So CS Chirchir ought to have given us the full contract. We scrutinize. However, this country is not known to give such contracts, because remember, we are still waiting for
yes, we are. Yeah. Yeah.
3 decades later. So this one, probably we will just see people do the job and move on without having to see the contract. So if they are transparent enough, then please share the contract.
Waseme.
Yes, tujue ni nani, mulipeana, tuangalie, anafanya kazi na kina nani. Hiyo ndio mbivu na mbichi. Everything else that CS says is already on record. We know, we understand. But who is this person that you are awarding the contract?
And I think you raise good questions, like the questions are, who is bidding? Who will finance this? How will it cost? Who benefits? Because, Linus, as we approach the end of the show, such large infrastructure projects, they attract a lot of scrutiny, they attract a lot of questions, they attract a lot of maswali, because they involve huge amounts of money. So naturally, citizens want answers, Linus, right?
Yes, and they do. They're not only asking for answers, but they also know that the upgrade, modernization, whatever you call it, of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport is long overdue. The airport, as currently is an embarrassment. We are falling behind the region because of the state of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. For travelers who come in from other places, including Kenyans, you just need to compare what your takeoff looked like and what your landing, where you're landing at, looks like. Some time back when it was raining, the roof was leaking. So it's a dry season now, so nothing is leaking. That airport is in a very, very bad state. But what is equally in a bad state is government's failure to communicate a good project like that. I don't know why the mystery about Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. And by the way, this will be the second time that governments are going to have a messy, is it second or third time actually? Third time. It's actually going to look messy for nothing. We can't do this airport at this rate where every time the discussion around the contracting comes up, it becomes a controversy. And currently it's become a controversy because Wicknell Chivayo is a poster boy of tenderpreneurship. This is the face of influence, of private influence on public affairs, because Wicknell Chivayo's wealth is built on his contracts that he's had with the Zimbabwean government, including one with on a solar project that apparently is never delivered. So immediately you have that name, and with the scrutiny we have here in Kenya, whether it's media, civil society, or the regular members of the public, you know, you should never forget in the Adani time, there was a protester that was saying, Wameiba, airport. Do you remember?
Amkeni airport imeuzwa.
Yes. This was not a journalist. This was not a civil society person. This was a very regular mwananchi that was actually in the process of a protest. This country is very, very vigilant. I think people are always on the lookout, especially for what is not right. So, JKI is a project whose time is now. It has to be done. We have to do that airport. But let's do it right and without controversy. And it's just about, and we hope the minister who spoke today, after waiting for so long to confirm things that he ought to have spoken about earlier, should now release and be open with the tendering process. Let's see who is it that has been picked to do the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, because a lot of time has been wasted. And I need to point out here, Bonyo, that in 2008, I think 2008, 2009, when we had the Grand Coalition government, that was the first time that a conversation was had about Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. 3 leaders famously went to India and met Adani. There are photographs of the late former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, the current president who was then a minister in the cabinet, William Ruto. And I think there was also Musalia Mudavadi who was in that photo, and a number of permanent secretaries, as they were called that time. They were with Adani on a railway line, visiting a number of projects, including one in Ahmedabad, the airport that was done by Adani. 2008 to 2026, how many years are those, Sam?
18.
Yes.
There's
a lot of time that we waste on things that ought to be out of the way, and there are good things, including Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. It's time to refurbish and to modernize that airport, if not to fall behind some of our neighbors, but who we've already fallen behind.
The Dar es Salaam airport is amazing.
Look at the Dar es Salaam airport. If you look at the Bole International Airport in Ethiopia, and the upcoming Kigali International Airport, the new airport that is going to come up in Rwanda, we are going to look bad very soon with this contraption called the JKIA. But we look worse if the tendering and all this contracting business is not above board.
Jamila, for the benefit of some, the first one was given to another controversial Kenyan businessman. Yes, that was also suspended.
And the name was Greenfield.
Right?
There is a Greenfield. Surely, Jamila. And you see, one of the big challenges, I actually covered the cancellation,
Oh, the first one.
Yes, the first cancellation.
Well, that's how you come in.
And you see, the unfortunate thing is that we don't appear to have learned from Adani. Or maybe we did, and we decided to hide things even further. Yes. Because the past few years, you'll see how hidden tenders are, especially this year and last year. As we speak, the Talanta Stadium, which is now very advanced stages of completion, the cost is still a questionable thing. The financing is still questionable. Well, there's something that was floated at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. Yes. But still, the value of that or the impact of that to the Kenyan taxpayer is still a question that is not properly explained. If we talk about the Rironi Mau Summit, the identification of the contractor was something else. The cost of it, it was only communicated. There are those that know, there are those that do not know. If you talk about the extension of SGR to Kisumu, then Malaba, again, the cost is always an estimate in dollar. But the identification of that contractor, never clear. The question of, has the contract been signed? By the way, is it being constructed as we speak?
No, not.
Which one?
The SGR extension from Suswa to Kisumu. It was launched. We saw the launch by the president. But in terms of the contract itself, who has seen it?
Yeah.
The costing, the financing, the source of those finances.
Studies.
You hear there is a possibility of securitizing the railway development levy. Has it happened? How much is it? What is Kenya's contribution? Yeah. What is the contribution of the contractor? what is the implication when it comes to paying that debt off, paying off that debt. If you have to look at the SGR in the much that it cost, I think it's close to 500 billion shillings, and the impact of it to the public debt that Kenyans continue to pay. You've seen it, what it is.
Yeah.
We have spoken on several occasions about how it is not yet broken even. We have spoken about it bringing revenue of up to 21 billion shillings, which is largely just sufficient to finance the operations. Then you do not communicate about the extension of the same to Malaba. So these questions, and the CS says that, or the ministry says that at the moment they are at the stage of, they have communicated the intention to award. What does that mean to Kenyans? Because it is important for Kenyans to work in this journey, because everyone wants infrastructure. We, as a country, need to get there. But how you work with the people in communication is more important. Because if you don't, then you find the suspicion that the government now is having to deal with almost a week since the first person blew the whistle about this matter. And then it's so unfortunate that whatever the government now says will be taken with, shall I say, a scoop of salt?
Yeah.
If not, yeah.
Not just a pinch.
Not just a pinch, because people are wondering, are they telling the truth, or are they just triggered because these questions are starting to be asked? I think there's a whole lesson to be learned, and knowing too well that we have an election next year. So what is the implication of all these signings to the future of the country, whatever happens in 2027, Jamila?
And you know, the message, there are some, if it were to be simplified, you mentioned Talanta Stadium, you mentioned JKIA, SGR, great things, good things. It should be possible, and this is something that government actually needs to make possible. It should be possible to do good things in a good way.
Yeah. Because the airport kujenga ni mzuri. Yeah. It's a good thing.
Mzuri, yes.
Yeah, you should be shouting from the mountaintop.
Giza, you know.
Yeah, that giza is what brings that suspicion. As you mentioned how many times ni kadhaa. And then you ask kwani watu hawaamini, kwani hawaoni vitu mzuri, kwani hawasifu miradi. I think this is another test of public confidence in government. Tumemaliza kipindi. Wacha tu nikuone huruma Sam leo, tuanze na wewe final word.